2010 would prove to be a fateful year in American politics when the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Citizens United, a little-known conservative nonprofit. The organization had sought to advertise a film critical of Hillary Clinton before the 2008 Democratic primary. However, this violated election laws at the time. The Supreme Court ruled that these election laws were a violation of free speech enshrined in the First Amendment and considered corporations to be people and money to be speech. Though the government could still impose limits and restrictions on direct contributions to parties and candidates, they could not on third parties as long as these third parties operated independently and transparently. In one fell swoop, campaign finance laws meant to limit the influence of big money and special interests in politics were rendered useless. The floodgates to corporate and union money had been opened. Before Citizens United, $5.3 billion was spent on the 2008 elections. By the 2020 elections, that number had more than doubled, reaching $14 billion. In this video, we will examine the damage caused by big money's influence in American politics, and if there is any way we can shut the floodgates. The Citizens United ruling was roundly criticized by politicians on the left and the right, and it's not hard to see why. It's just plain wrong on so many levels. First, it's just wrong in principle. The ruling was based on two notions, the first being that corporations are people. However, corporations are not people. In fact, they are legal vehicles meant to shield people from liability. Second, if money equals speech, it necessarily follows that rich people have more of a voice than others, which goes against that most American of ideals that all men are created equal. The Citizens United ruling also fundamentally undermines democracy. Throughout this series, we've said that for a democracy to function well, it must serve all people, not just certain special interests and not just the interests of a wealthy minority. Allowing big money into politics means politicians are disproportionately focused on the problems of the wealthy instead of ordinary citizens. As the pandemic has shown, people start to lose faith in a system when they see it only works for an elite few, and this can have terrible consequences. However, for this channel, it's not good enough for a policy to simply feel wrong for it to be rejected. What are the actual real-world consequences of having big money in politics? For instance, does money spent on campaign ads actually influence the choice of voters? The answer is yes, but it's a bit more nuanced than you might think. Though around 9 out of 10 House races were won by the candidate who raised the most money, this correlation probably has more to do with the fact that donors want to be able to influence the winner as opposed to additional spending persuading voters. In close races, the spending on advertising also tends to cancel out. Ad spending is definitely not the most cost-effective means of persuading voters. However, that does not mean that campaign spending cannot be effective in certain situations. Big money can be particularly influential in raising the profile of an unknown candidate or increasing their chances in a primary election. They can also be effective in swaying voters on ballot issues. What is a lot more clear-cut and disconcerting is the ability of money to influence politicians. One of the issues is that congressmen, particularly House members, are vulnerable to the influence of big money as they are in constant fundraising mode. Campaign contributions also appear to be particularly effective when it comes to influencing decisions on economic issues, more so than on social issues. Now, it's important to know that it usually isn't as simple as donating and then having a politician vote in your favor on an issue. Rather, campaign contributions work together with lobbying as a one-two punch in influencing politicians, with campaign contributions providing access and lobbying the ability to persuade. One study found that $1 of corporate campaign contributions is worth $6.65 in lower state corporate taxes. If businesses and the wealthy are successfully influencing policymaking, what is the actual effect on society? Frequently, special interests seek to influence the government for the purpose of rent-seeking, that is, to obtain financial gain without needing to compete in the market. Not only do the resulting policies usually hurt consumers, but vast amounts of resources are spent on campaign donations and lobbying that are not being spent on product innovation, lower prices, or higher wages. Or charity. Think about the difference it would make if a significant amount of that $14 billion spent on trying to influence politicians instead went to cancer research. When rent seekers win, society as a whole loses. So the Citizens United ruling has allowed big money to flow into American politics and have an even greater influence than before. However, is it even working as the Supreme Court intended with super PACs operating independently and transparently? The answer is not really. Politicians and their supporters have found clever ways to bend these rules, if not break them entirely. For instance, a politician may appear at a super PAC fundraiser and give a speech, and that is totally fine if they don't explicitly solicit donations. Super PACs have also threatened congressmen that they would withdraw support if they didn't vote for a certain bill. When Congress was considering an unpopular tax reform package in 2017, Corey Bliss, the head of the Congressional Leadership Fund Super PAC, gave House Republicans an ultimatum. The group would not support members who voted against the bill. To avoid disclosing their donors, super PACs on both sides will raise funds right before the vote, resulting in the potentially embarrassing disclosures happening right after the election has taken place. This is what happened in the North Carolina Democrat Senate primary, where a pop-up super PAC, Carolina Blue, helped ensure Cal Cunningham's nomination. After the primary was over, it was revealed that it was funded entirely by Democrats' Senate Majority PAC. Even if effective regulations were in place to ensure super PACs were operating properly, it's not as if they are subject to any scrutiny right now. The Federal Election Commission, whose responsibility is to enforce campaign finance law, and is, at the best of times, largely toothless, is only able to impose fines and civil penalties. In recent years, it has become more and more deadlocked, and for over a year, it didn't even function because of a lack of quorum. Not only are the floodgates open, but the entire flood prevention structure is broken. So how can we get money out of American politics? There are two solutions that would permanently fix the problem. However, the chance of either of them happening in the current political environment is pretty much zero. The first is a constitutional amendment. Several have been proposed that clearly define personhood as applying to people only, money being different from speech, and clearly giving the federal government the right to regulate campaign fundraising. Unfortunately, a constitutional amendment requires a two-thirds majority in both the House and the Senate, and with the current partisan climate, it's basically a non-starter. The second permanent solution would be the Supreme Court overturning Citizens United. Now, the Supreme Court has done this in the past when it saw that what they intended did not happen in reality, and you could certainly argue that's the case now as super PACs are clearly working together with the politicians they endorse. However, the current makeup of the Supreme Court of 6 conservative justices means this is equally unlikely to happen anytime soon. If we can't eliminate money in politics, can we at least neutralize it by forcing super PACs to properly report their donors and actually prevent them from coordinating with candidates? This is one of the aims of H.R. 1, the expansive democratic reform bill we've mentioned in previous episodes. H.R. 1 adds new disclosure requirements that increase super PAC transparency, as well as applying these requirements to online ads. It also reforms the FEC, giving it the power and capability to actually properly enforce these regulations. Finally, H.R. 1 aims to neutralize the effect of big money by using federal funds to match small donations 6-1. Similar to a long-standing successful program in New York State. However, H.R. 1 is not without its flaws. For instance, the American Civil Liberties Union, though they agree with most of the bill, have concerns that some of the disclosure requirements in H.R. 1 may infringe on First Amendment rights. Though I'm not sure I agree with these concerns, having a part of the law vulnerable to being overturned by a Supreme Court ruling would undermine it and is something to be wary of. Assuming that H.R. 1 passes with all of its provisions, have we now, at the very least, neutralized the influence of money in politics? Unfortunately, the answer is no, and it gets worse. It turns out there is another kind of political action committee called leadership PACs that allow politicians to personally raise money from any source, and they can use it for pretty much any purpose. The only restriction is they can't spend the funds on their own campaigns, but they can give funds to colleagues and help them with their campaigns. Initially, they were used as a way to curry favor with fellow politicians and gain certain offices. However, since now pretty much every politician has one, they've now largely lost that power. At present, they're essentially used by politicians as a slush fund, allowing them to get courtside tickets or pay for family trips to Disney World. If you're a corporation looking to influence a politician, what better way than to contribute to said politician's personal party fund? What's worse is that nobody from either party seems to be paying attention to leadership PACs or doing anything to close this massive loophole. This is not a story with a happy ending, or a clear light at the end of the tunnel. The only real ways of ending the problem of money in politics for good are likely decades away, and that's if things go well. I believe the provisions in H.R. 1 will neutralize the worst aspects of the aftermath of Citizens United, but the ongoing existence of leadership PACs shows how pervasive the problem is. As history has shown with other aspects of American democracy, ending the distorting influence of money in politics will be a long and uphill battle. Thank you for watching. I would like to give a shout out to the Campaign Legal Center, an organization striving for strong enforcement of campaign finance laws. Please consider supporting them. In the next video, we will conclude the series on fixing American democracy by going in-depth into a bill that could set it on a brighter path. It is likely the most important legislation of the Biden administration and of this generation. Next time, we will be examining H.R. 1.